Welcome back. We last left off with me honking my horn about how I had this tremendously strong mob farm design that is also basically just a box, but because it's a goose branded box, it's 5,000 times better and can solve world hunger, and its boogers are also rainbow colored. This idea failed, because the game decided that it wanted to get clever, as did my backup plan design number 2. And the only tremendous thing about backup plan design number 3 was the amount of frames I dropped whenever I looked at it. Well, worry not, fellow avians, because like many things in life, this suckage can be solved by doing it harder. More DACA does indeed solve most of my problem, and in very, very long order, I am left with a mob farm that actually does some of what its name implies, when it isn't broken or overflowing with experience, at least. This only cost me 10 more max enchanted etheric swords and dynamism tablets, and 21 more sewers to pull off. All of this crafted and enchanted with this, harvested from mobs. Don't ask how long this took. You do not want to know the answer. Now all that's left is to scale it up. Diamonds are pretty easy to make through trading, and I have mountains of emeralds for reasons that definitely have nothing at all to do with the fact that I just enchanted 10 swords using the souls of villagers, so the only limiter is how many wrath shards I have at my disposal, which is a decent enough amount. I never bothered measuring what the optimal smeltery to wrath cage ratio is, mostly because I don't care, but as long as I maintain a 2-to-1 ratio of blazes to witches, I'm never going to have to worry about stalling due to backed up essential lines, so it doesn't really matter. 4 more wrath cages and another smelting setup later, and I'm sitting pretty on a lovely little automated mob farm, give or take a couple OSHA citations for the still unfinished containment shells. And this is where it gets a little bit awkward. I had originally intended to use this mob farm loop to fuel a massive bank of endo flames and use the surplus of mana that generates to produce items and generate power. But I wasn't planning on needing to use dynamism tablets to kill the mobs. Spikes are great at bulk mob killing when they work. Dynamism tablets, well, they are an option, kind of in the same way that pineapple is a pizza topping. I need something that the game thinks is a player kill to make the blazes drop their rods, but they don't really work all that well. The system certainly isn't bad, but until and unless I want to do some serious upgrading to leverage the weird jankery that comes from dynamism tablets interacting with weapons with passive effects, it is not going to scale hard enough, so it's back to the drawing board on the mana generation problem. The issue with this is that this version of Botania doesn't really have a whole lot of options. Dayblooms, Nightshades, and Hydrangeas are all passive and cheap, but they can't scale. Endoflames are great, despite certain commenters indicating otherwise, but the whole point of this is finding an alternative to them. Entrepinions need TNT, and duping it is lame, and crafting it the normal way would probably require more energy than it produces, so no. Air-infused fire is disabled in this pack, so Kekimuris gets demoted from an instant win condition to basically a meme flower unless I want to make a cake factory. Munch Dews require tree farms, and a scalable setup won't be power efficient enough. Narsolimnuses never seem to work even when I do use them correctly. Rosa Arcana need player interaction, which violates the whole point of this, and Spectralus would require a ridiculous amount of sheep. Taint thistles are basically passive generator flowers, but 5,000 times more annoying to automate, and thermal lilies only really work if I have goose juice magic. That leaves precisely one option, which is Gormies. Which is why you have been watching me grub around looking for Thonic Shard Ore, because I'm going to need more Wrath Cages. I promise you, my goal is not to do a nothing redux with my tech tree here, it's just that the optimal solution is optimal for a good reason, and it doesn't stop being optimal just because it's boring. So, feeding your Gormarillus. There are a bunch of really solid options for food production in this pack. At the most basic level, chickens with some kind of auto-crafting system is an instant win condition, as are really any kind of automated farm design that scales up fast enough to reliably output. Bread in the form of toast would be an excellent second bet, for example, if a little bit uncreative. I opt for neither because factory farming chickens is far too humane for my current tech level, and the whole bread pun bit stopped being funny 2 episodes ago. Instead, I plan on sourcing my energy in a far more goosey way by burning a steakhouse full of cows alive. Cows drop leather and steak and don't need to be killed by a player to do so, which should let me use an iron spike, which actually works, instead of a diamond one. Leather could then be smelted into Bestia Essentia, albeit fairly inefficiently, and steak is an excellent food for gourmies because they forgot to patch the hunger values for it. Ethics? What is this ethics thing you speak of? We don't talk about that here. Unfortunately, this design also fails, because apparently iron spikes don't like using the looting enchantment on cows, I guess, and without looting, it can't sustain the Essentia output necessary to keep the cow loop going. Huzzah! I don't care anymore. This has taken way too long. It's time to beat the solution with the lag stick. Conveniently, I still happen to be sitting on a really suspicious amount of emeralds, so I shell out for some safari nets and get to bird-napping my entire poultry farm. Now, I want to be clear here. This is not a good idea. It's loud, it's stupid, it leaks eggs and feathers everywhere because mob cramming shoved all the chickens into a corner, and item entities do not like thickened glass for some reason, but it does produce a not inconsiderable amount of mana for free, once you consider that using my CPU as a space heater does double duty and helps with the cost of heating my recording room. Calling this thing anything other than a glorified lag bomb in any other context would be a gross overstatement, but it does at least do what it was designed to do, which renders it distinct from the other attempts that I made at producing mana, which did nothing except waste 3.5 hours of my life and 3.5 minutes of yours. So we are making progress here, but this is not going to be a long-term solution. Speaking of wasting your time, I have a merch deal with the lovely folks at Eclipsify. They're selling mousepads with a picture of my feathery butt cheeks on them, and also some other stuff. They sent me a sample. It's actually a really good mousepad, and if you're interested, the link to their store is in the description. Getting back on track, having mana is great, but having raw mana is not terribly useful. What is useful is a way of producing stuff from it, so I spend way too long micromanaging the crafting of a single orchid and slam it down next to the mana output. I'm gonna be getting rid of most of the space anyway later, may as well turn it into ore first, albeit very slowly. I also, for some reason, recorded myself digging ore out of this wall for like 10 minutes straight for no reason, but that's fine because I could feel you judging me in the comments for using orchids, and I need to set some records straight. This mod pack has 3 ways of producing bulk quantities of raw ore, short of just mining it out of the ground. Orchids from Botania, mining lasers from Mine Factory Reloaded, and the mining dimension, which is unlocked using Thaumic Tinkerer's Awakened Icorian Pickaxe on Bedrock. If you watch my Big Dig series, you will know that I consider mining lasers to be such a last resort that I started mining the fabric of space-time itself before I considered using them. This is because they trivialize the game in a way that is cripplingly boring to play with. The mining dimension is somehow several orders of magnitude more broken, and despite not being automatable or scalable per se, it contains ore veins something like 1,600 blocks in size of just about every ore in the game, which seems uninteresting. Orchids, then, by nature of not being cataclysmically unbalanced, are an objectively bad choice for high-yield mining. I am aware of this. Mining lasers and the mining dimension are so easy to exploit that it ruins the fun of the game, though, so I'm not going to use them unless I have a very good reason to. Thanks for attending my TED Talk. That said, just because the mining dimension is broken doesn't mean I consider the rest of Thaumic Tinkerer off limits. The central crafting material for Icorium equipment, Ichor, requires 3 items that I don't have yet: nether shards, end shards, and nether stars. The shards have custom crafting recipes that let you cast them with balanced charge and either Enderium or Vulcanite, but for some reason the nether shards can also be made with an induction smelter. No idea why. Either way, my orchid has cooperated and given me a whopping single block of shiny, also known as platinum, ore, and I have plenty of shards floating around that I can put to the task, so neither were a particularly difficult issue. Nether stars likewise present less of a technological hurdle and more of a logistical one. Killing withers is trivial, and I can dig up the volcano for soul sand, but as the proud owner of something that could be mistaken for a social life, if you squint and really look at it turnways, I have better things to do than wait around for my infusion altar to finish up the brain oatmealizing process of creating 24 wither skulls via infusion. Instead, I solve this problem with the same technique that I used to solve all of my other problems thus far. Murder! A safari-netted wither skeleton in an auto-spawner running on precise mode makes infinite wither skeletons. Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery, and I use my brand new 100% humane paper cleaver to go Marie Antoinette on a bunch of them. As per typical, the most slow and annoying part of the process was getting the essentia. Lux is trivial with torches, Humanus is inconvenient, but still easy with rotten flesh. However, the only good renewable source of spiritus I have right now is ghostwood logs, so I got to go around and spam inundated my island with ghostwood trees to get the 8 stacks that I needed for this. While I'm waiting on all of that junk to smelt, cook down, and liquefy into magic juice respectively, I need another wand. Ichor cloth uses 125 vis of each type per craft, and my current options cannot meet that number. If this were New Horizons, this technology would probably be gated behind strapping a rocket in my pocket and flying up to Beetlejuice or something, but thankfully it is not, so this is as trivial as just crafting a better wand. Now for the money-making question. Where, oh where, am I going to get all of the vis? I sure wonder. There is a crafting recipe to turn wither skulls and soul sand into nether stars directly, but I opt to play Whack-A-Wither instead because I want the XP. XP is going to very quickly become a valuable resource here in a few minutes, and I want every scrap of it that I can scrape up. Plus, it gives me a chance to subject you to this, and we all know how much I love torturing my fanbase. These powers combined, plus a lovely relaxing lunchtime AFK session while all the infusion goes on, nets me a stack of Icorium. It's great stuff, but like mana is entirely useless on its own, so my next project is turning it into the first of many Icorium-gated pieces of equipment. A wand with a really long name that basically just says it's silverwood but covered in fancy orange stuff that lets it hold 1000 vis of each type and has a native discount of 30%. I could up this to 1500 vis and 40% if I wanted to make a scepter, but I really want to be able to use wand foci in the future, so a wand it is. You can tell that it's strong because the recipe takes 2 minutes to infuse. I would say that I wish I was back in New Horizons, but I would probably still be in NV by this point, so no, I don't, actually. More aimless infusing and the slaughter of basically all of my mushroom farm to fund the ordo cost later, and I finish up the construction of my wand and what I consider to be one of the 2 most powerful wand foci in the entire pack. The Experience Focus. When placed on a wand and used, the Experience Focus turns experience levels directly into this at a not inconsiderable rate. It isn't automatable in the sense that I can't make a machine to do it, and the conversion rate is pretty terrible without upgrades to buff it, but experience is so much easier to produce in bulk than vis is that those trade-offs are entirely inconsequential. There are very few things in this game that will make a dent in the effective amount of vis I now have at my disposal, even before taking into account the 181 levels of experience I'm casually sitting on. So once you factor all that together, vis costs have been made almost entirely irrelevant. Obvious next steps are obvious, so I also collect, infuse, and craft all of the junk needed to assemble a full set of Awakened Icorium armor, a bottomless pouch to store my truly ridiculous collection of tools, reference manuals, modded implements, toothpicks, dental floss, chewing gum, baling wire, duct tape, and, somewhat unusually, an Awakened Icorium sword. In hindsight, making the armor was probably a waste of time, since a lot of its passives are entirely irrelevant or are doubled up on by the Ring of Odin, and the biggest boon that it offers, which is Creative Flight, can be way more easily enabled with an Angel Ring. But it's fine. I didn't need that 2.5 hours of my life for, anything useful. The real get here is the Awakened Icorium Sword. It is, so far as I know, the only item in the game that is unbreakable, has an area of effect hit radius, and can be enchanted, which gives it the wonderful secondary traits of being the single most obnoxious upgrade to dynamism tablets that I can conceive of, and an entirely necessary one if I want to scale them up. But hey, if nothing else, the whole mess gave me my zoomies back. It isn't really modded Minecraft unless you can stub your toe at Mach 3, after all. With that unfathomably odious side upgrade out of the way, it's back to work progressing on actual technology. I need centivis production to power advanced alchemical smelteries and, to a lesser extent, wand foci upgrades. Crafting my own nodes from silverwood farms is an option if ever I'm feeling exceptionally masochistic, and I will probably end up doing that later on down the line anyway, but for now I can content myself with wandering around stealing the untainted nodes that remain in the countryside and feeding them to one another until I get something I actually want to use. This ends up being a lot easier than I thought it would be. Silverleaf potions are basically free now that this is a solved problem, so I can go wherever I want inside the map, but they don't end up being super necessary. There are quite a few untainted nodes just kind of hanging out on the edges of the map that are neither tainted or are just barely inside the tainted borders, so the whole node abduction process is less like bushwhacking through hostile purple people eater territory and more similar to binge shopping with mommy's credit card. Side note, for people who aren't familiar with what I'm doing here, node bullying, which is its informal name, is a process where bigger Thaumcraft nodes will try to steal aspects from smaller Thaumcraft nodes in a 9-block cube centered on the node in question. The process is not terribly efficient, and it is agonizingly slow, but if you're willing to farm out or abduct a bunch of nodes and have nothing better to do with your life, you can stack up some really ridiculously massive nodes. And when you energize them, they then make very powerful centivis producers. I don't usually bother with it because the main uses for centivis, i.e. wand charging for the most part, as well as upgrades and infernal and advanced alchemical furnace power, are not usually super relevant for any of my modded playthroughs, but this is a rare case where not only do I want some of that tech, I want to be able to use it at scale and have no other options for making that happen. By exploiting the range limitation on node bullying, the 8 nodes that I placed into a cube around the center protected node will hopefully get slowly eaten down into nothing and feed all of their aspects into the center one, which I can then charge up and run my base off of. At least, that's the idea. Spoilers, I don't even think these nodes were 25% consumed by the time this episode finished, so most likely I'm just going to quietly disappear them and charge up what I've got when I need it. In the meantime, I can make do with a couple of much weaker nodes strategically selected to give me at least some of each of the 6 primal aspect types. They will not be nearly as fast, and most of these nodes would probably struggle to power an advanced alchemical furnace, but I won't have to sit and watch nodes swap spit for 30 hours either, so I will take that trade-off. This bank of energized nodes is put to service powering a focal manipulator, read fancy wand focus upgrade device, which I use to level up the other massively important wand focus, the focus of purity. This focus is basically a reusable, overpowered silverleaf potion without any of the limitations that come from having to physically harvest the materials for, craft, carry around, or throw items to clean up taint. When fully enlarged to its maximum possible limits, the focus can clear and purify a square area of any taint or taint byproducts, 13 blocks on a side from bedrock to height limit, and it will also transform the underlying biome type back into its natural state, which allows me to pass through it per my rules. As an interesting side note, if you can supply the excessive amount of this focus demands, this is actually a very fast way of clearing up large swaths of terrain to the point where it's a decent fallback option if you have a few hours to fly around and don't want to make a cyber totem. In my case, I mostly just want it so I can more easily clear out large areas of land for strip mining, but to each their own. To my eternal chagrin, I do end up making a bit more Icorium and hammering out an awakened Vicorium pickaxe. They are actually fairly cheap as far as anything from Pthamic Tinkerer goes, and the 5x5 mining mode is massively better than anything else I'm going to be able to use for a bit. I'm not going to use the bedrock dimension though, because that's still lame. Orchids are perfectly viable as far as ore production goes in the long term, but I am so unfathomably tired of trying to handle all of the junk in my trunk that I have decided I want to get applied energistic storage going now, and since it is my highest priority and I don't feel like waiting on it, I decide to strip mine the desert to extract an exceptionally large amount of quartz. To answer the obvious question, yes, I do at some point realize that I have about 15 different ways of giving myself night vision. It did, however, take me a little bit to realize this, and the actual length of time involved in that realization is one of those secrets that I will be taking to my grave. Once you have enough raw resources to throw at it, applied energistics in Blightfall works the exact same as it does in every other mod pack. You take some shiny rocks and metal shiny rock boxes, and you add powder and shiny rocks to metal shiny rock boxes to make shiny powerful rocks, and then throw shiny powerful, you get the idea. Shiny blue rock, shiny white rock, shiny red rock, shiny purple rock, smush, waterboard, slice, dice, smelt, craft, and boom, just like that, out comes the absolute bare minimum of an A2 setup. A drive box for storing disks, a crafting terminal for adding and removing stuff from the disks, and a place where you can stick power. Further expansion will no doubt come later because New Horizons has spoiled me rotten, and I now consider manually crafting anything to represent a failure of logistics. While I'm at it, I also make 10 4K disks because there isn't really any such thing as too much storage unless and until it starts reverting your chunks, at which point we just convert the area into a quarry. Now I get to my favorite part of any modded playthrough, which is the oh-so-fun game of how much junk can I cram in this trunk? Hold, please. The answer ends up being a lot, however, I am almost entirely at capacity already, which perhaps says a lot about my hoarding habits as of late. Point remains, now that I'm running on AE2 storage, I'm on the clock to come up with better power production options. Yellorium is renewable now, thanks to orchids, but as previously harped on at a length that would give the ending of a Tchaikovsky symphony a run for its money, I kind of don't like big reactors for personal reasons. I mean, they're fine, but come on, really? And since my only other power production option is Botania, that means it's time to get serious about mass-producing mana. To that end, I have a fantastic new idea. Now hear me out here. I will admit that my first 3 fantastic new ideas for free infinite mana forever or your money back for only 9 installments of $19.99 plus shipping and handling maybe kinda sorta were not good ideas for multiple distinct and really obvious in hindsight reasons. By which I mean the first 2 were completely ineffective, and the third one works by consuming a small third world country's electricity supply. So let's use a design that I know will actually work and stop messing around with meme builds. The first step is to kill all the chickens. No problem, I have an AoE sword and oh god, the lag. And the XP spam. Really should have just burned the chickens in lava or something. This was not a good first step. Anyway, once that mess is cleaned up, conveniently netting me a excellent 16,000 feathers that I will never in a million years find a use for, I start slapping some things together. This new build is very similar to my old one in a number of ways and reuses a lot of the old equipment. Instead of chickens, I instead have the world's lamest wheat farm situated over a combination hopper minecart and regular hopper for auto collection. Rather than harvesting it with an MFR harvester and planter combo, or God forbid, my hands, which would consume precious power, I'm exploiting the right-click to harvest mechanic, not breaking seeds, by giving a Thumbcraft golem the mind-numbing task of literally watching grass grow. Sorry bud, someone's gotta do it, and it sure ain't gonna be me. The wheat from the farm is fed into the hacked-together auto-crafting system from earlier, this time modified so that it will craft flour, and the flour gets sent on to a Trivection upgraded redstone furnace for fast, easy smelting and free duplication. And then the bread gets sent on to another furnace for even more fast, easy smelting and another round of free duplication to produce 4 bread from a single piece of flour, somehow. I can already feel my NPC crew's intestines quivering in terror, but don't you worry, people? This bread is for my flower garden. And yes, they are cannibalistic, thanks for asking. The real question here is, how do I make the wheat grow? Bone meal doesn't work in this pack for reasons that I have legitimately no idea why, unless it was for some sort of balancing thing, but so far as I'm aware, bone meal works on every other crop, so who knows? Point is, bone meal spam is not the answer. Would sure be a shame if there was something that was perfectly equivalent to bone meal in function that was even easier to use, wouldn't it? Well, wouldn't you know it, but there happens to be something entirely equivalent to bone meal that is even easier to use. Introducing the secret sauce of this build. It's poop. Literally, just massive amounts of poop. Sewers automatically collect a fluid called sewage, wow, what a thought, from passive mobs in their proximity. Sewage can be composted with a composter, we're really going with the inventive names here, to make industrial compost, and an industrial compost put into a fertilizer does exactly what you think it would do, but it bypasses the no bone meal restriction on wheat. Even better, the coup de grace of this terrible, horrible system is that one of the optimal mobs to collect sewage from happens to be cows, which means for the first time in all of my channel's history, my base is now powered by actual literal bullshit. And as is typical for my builds, your complimentary, wait, what do you mean it doesn't work like that, moment comes when I realize that my minecart hopper is not, in fact, picking up any of the wheat. I solved this sort of with a little bit of minecart jankery that lets me clip the minecart into the block of farmland, so it isn't a big deal immediately. And now that I can see it in action, this design does suffer from limitations in that I can scale wheat production so hard that everything else will stall, but I will cross that bridge in a second. For the final step, I complete the production loop by setting up a slow trickle feed of toast to a dedicated RF producer built into the factory. Whenever possible, always give your power loops their own internal generators, kids. Self-feeding, centralized power grids are a recipe for unrecoverable gridlocks, especially when you're going to be using applied energistics to automate everything up to and including your booger extraction process. I have no idea how much power this thing needs to self-sustain, but it isn't a whole lot because 2 gourmies eating toast don't quite buffer the furnaces, and 3 starts making a bit of a backlog. So I went ahead and gave it 3, and we'll just accept the inefficiency loss. I also got tired of futzing with the hopper setup at this point and swapped it for a petite floating hopper hawk. The hopper minecart was super unreliable for some reason, wonder why, and I didn't feel like losing wheat to an inconsistent game mechanic or my own incompetence when there are better options available. So that's a nice start. Now we need to make it go faster. I have enough stuff by this point that I can pretty painlessly upgrade my redstone furnaces to resonant tier, so I do that, and then I slam in some speed upgrades because I'm definitely going to need them. My crafting setup, while free, is also far too slow for a fully jacked wheat clicker, so I swap it out for a thermal expansion machine called a cyclic assembler, which is just an autocrafter. It will eat microscopic amounts of energy, but it is not enough to matter, and it has the advantage of not being horribly janky. Finally, I have to figure out what I want to do with the composters. I can make basically infinite poo, and have no way of speeding them up other than feeding them with enough power to let them run at full speed, so I upgrade the power supply and then cram in some more. Quantity is a quality all to its own, and I can spam out composters without any issues. That's the bread done, now I just need things to eat it. Oh boy, are you ready for some fun rune crafting time with Goose? Yeah, I'm not either. Skip. 1 heptatrizillion years later, and I'm the proud owner of a full stack of gourmies. Is this overkill? Yes, because it's not like we're going to be uber enchanting anything. Do I care? Not particularly. I'm a little bit tired of being poor and would like to solve that problem in superliminal velocity, if you don't mind. 1 Gormorillus running at full tilt can consume a piece of toast in a hair under 4 seconds, which is a very convenient amount of time given how thermal expansion servos, also known as the pipe upgrade that takes things out of containers, work in this pack. A resonant servo will let me perform 2 extraction operations a second, extracting anywhere from 1 to 64 items in the process. Using round-robin mode, a logistics mode that tries to send 1 extracted set of items to every inventory a pipe is connected to in order, I can just underclock the servo to only extract 1 toast per extraction cycle and tell it to rotate that toast through one of 8 open crates, which will dump the toast on their gourmet in exactly the right amount of time. Add in some mana logistics to disperse the mana wherever it needs to go, and all of a sudden you have a whole lot of mana going a whole lot of nowhere very, very quickly. It is so much mana, in fact, that the initial design called for 4 potency lensed Gaia mana spreaders, And when I allocated those to the task, they saturated, so I ended up needing twice as many. Now we're talking. The only plausible drawback I see is that this system does consume 16 toasts a second, so if I'm going to be running it full time, I'm going to need to upgrade the poop scoopers again. That will be a problem for later, though, because I have other plans. Now that I have infinite mana, the real question becomes, what am I gonna do with it? For the short term, the answer is not a whole lot. I dupe a bunch of redstone and quartz for future projects, and in preparation for a couple of things I have planned out later, I crack together some Terra Steel and start charging up a Terra Shatterer, but I need to get ore production in place first before I start doing anything fancy tech-wise. The one orchid from earlier may have done an admirable job, but my marshmallow economy is as dead as the 700 or so chickens I brutally slaughtered a minute ago to make room for my poop to mana converter, and I'm short on materials again. This issue can be solved permanently with the lovely integrated ore processing factory that definitely did not take 3 hours to construct, because I'm a tinker and cannot stop futzing with things. I have no idea what you're talking about. In fact, I've never tinkered a day in my life. Aqueous accumulators produce water for free. When upgraded, they produce a lot of water for free, and I have a resonant one right here. That water can be fed to an igneous extruder, which consumes water with lava as a catalyst to make stone. Stone is dumped into an open crate, which dumps it on the floor, where it can be picked up by this bank of ranunculpuses. Good luck saying that 5 times fast. Which place it in front of pistons. The pistons shove the stone in range of a bank of orchids, where it may or may not be turned into ore, depending on whether the orchids have excess mana, whether they're off cooldown, and what the phase of the moon is, and the stone ore agglomerate continues to be shoved into a bank of identity annihilation planes, which are basically silk touch auto pickaxes from Applied Energistics. From there, the network is in charge of routing the raw ore wherever is best for it to be processed. Almost all of it will be fed into induction smelters for quick and easy doubling, or pulverizers for pulverization, but certain ores are either incompatible with this process or are too valuable to waste, so depending on what I want from them, they may be routed to a formation plane and mined via dynamism tablets with a corrupting Fortune 3 enchanted pickaxe, or stored for later processing. Excess stone is mostly a waste product since it's too inefficient to convert to sand directly, but I don't anticipate a whole lot of it sneaking through, and I can always store it for future use later. To supply sand, there is an automated subroutine that converts cobblestone to sand directly for induction smelting or glass production. All of this is powered by mana beamed in from the poop machine, meaning that it is entirely self-sustaining and will run until the storage cells saturate. Take that, you stupid mining dimension. As with everything Applied Energistics, the devil lies in the details, which are in this case, that my export buses are unable to export more than 9 kinds of item at once, and the formation plane behaves more like a storage bus than an export bus, which causes some complications. Both of them can be mitigated by installing gloriously overcomplicated messes of subnetting that I'm not even going to try to explain, because it's one of those situations where if you need to know it, you already know it, and if you don't need to know it, you do not want to know. Anyway, if you ignore the question of how it works, the fact remains that it does work very well, so after a little bit of cleaning up and final reconfiguration, I now have a happy little ore factory that will sustain me into the fast approaching endgame. And that, I believe, is where we shall leave it for today. Thank you all for your time. Mousepads are still a thing, and will be for a little bit, so if you're interested in checking them out, there's a link in the description, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.